Thank you so much for watching this message from our Young Adults Ministry here at Reston Bible Church. My name is David Wright, and I'm one of the pastors here at RBC and get to oversee this wonderful ministry. To know more about young adults, please follow us on Instagram at Reston Bible YA. Enjoy the message.
Tonight I will be reading Luke 16, 1 through 13. He also said to the disciples, "There is a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. And he called him and he said to him, 'What is this that I hear about you? Turn in the account of your management, for you can no longer be manager.' And the manager said to himself, 'What shall I do, since my master has taken the management away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do, so that when I'm removed from management, people may receive me into their homes.' So summoning his master's debtors, one by one, he said to the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He said, 100 measures of oil. He said to him, 'Take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, 'And how much do you owe?' He said, 100 measures of wheat. He said to him, 'Take your bill and write 80. The master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness, for the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourself by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. One who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you to the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money."
Well, good evening again. Good to see y'all. If you have not yet done it, open your Bibles to Luke chapter 16. That's where we're going to be this evening. We are in a series on the parables of Jesus that we are calling Ears to Hear, because Jesus often says, "He who has ears, let him hear," at the end of a parable. Just to remind you, a parable is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning, or as I heard recently, it's a story with a punch. We've covered the parables of the sower, the great banquet, and the lost son. And then last week we began a two-part mini-series within the series, covering two parables that have to do with stewardship, resources, and especially tonight, money. An estimated 1/3 of Jesus' parables have to do with money. There's a reason for that. The parables are stories to give us insight into the kingdom, how to live in light of the coming kingdom, how to prepare for it, and how to live as citizens of it. And money reveals much about one's priorities. Specifically, if your priorities are truly lined up with the kingdom of God. I recently had a premarital counseling session with a couple. One of the topics we cover in premarital counseling is finances, and one of the assignments that I have my couples do is I have them go to the previous month. I have them tally up every single purchase they made on their credit card, debit card, Venmo, whatever it might be. Then I have them categorize those purchases, and then I have them give a percentage of that category compared to their monthly income. And people are always shocked about where their money goes. Why? Because we may say we have certain priorities. We may like to confess that we have certain priorities, but our bank statement might say otherwise. I've had two guys recently in my premarital counseling sessions pay close to, one just over, one just under, $1,000 a month on eating out. Don't point fingers. Don't point fingers. I ain't looking. Okay? My guess is before these guys did that, they would not have said that eating out was a top priority in their life. And yet, by their credit card statement, it was. Jesus is very concerned about what we do with our money, what we do with our worldly possessions, because it reveals a deeper heart posture. And these last 2 weeks, I should say, we are looking at parables regarding money, stewardship, and resources. Last week, we looked at the parable of the talents. Tonight, we look at the parable of the shrewd or dishonest or unjust manager, depending on your translation. So let me pray, and we'll dive in together. Jesus, thank you that you reminded me through my brother Jonathan recently that you say that we are to be as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves. And I pray that our whole lives would reflect that we would be wise in the way that we deal and navigate this beautiful but fallen world we live in, and that we would be innocent in doing so. Lord, that if all of our lives were to be exposed to the public, that we would have nothing to hide. I pray that we would be men and women who are transparently holy, that we would not have pet sins or pet parts of our lives that may not even be sin, but may just be gray area that we don't want anyone to know about. And I pray for these young adults. Lord, they set such a standard of excellence in so many regards in this church, serving in Quest, serving in student ministry, serving on the worship team. I pray that we as a ministry would set a standard for this church, would be examples in our youth in the way that we steward and give generously and prioritize our money that you've given us around your kingdom priorities. In Jesus' name we pray, and all God's people said. Well, last night I opened my message with maybe my favorite TV show when I was in college, Shark Tank. This week I'm opening my message with my favorite TV show from high school, which was a show called Psych. Sounds like some of you have seen it before. If you haven't seen it, Psych is about a guy in his 20s who lives in Santa Barbara, California, named Sean Spencer. Sean has a gift for observation and a photographic memory. Furthermore, his dad was a respected detective and spent his time fathering Sean, training Sean from a young age to become an excellent detective one day. However, Sean has essentially wasted the resources at his disposal. He bounces between odd jobs, he avoids commitment and direction, but eventually, because he's really talented, he starts helping out the Santa Barbara Police Department solve cases. He's able to see things and perceive things that the existing detectives on the SBPD cannot see. And so he helps them out. But rather than admitting that he's able to help out the SBPD because he has great abilities, instead he lies to everyone and says that he is able to notice things that other people don't because he is a psychic. This lie leads him to eventually open a psychic detective business. And under this lie, he begins to develop friendships, business relationships, and even romantic relationships, all under the umbrella of this lie. His dishonesty is pervasive. He cannot help but be dishonest. One of the shticks in the show is that he has this best friend named Gus, who's also his partner. And he walks around and he constantly introduces Gus as not his name. He makes up various characters for his best friend. Every episode, he's lying about who he is. And he calls him these ridiculous names. He calls him Guy Buttersnaps and Hummingbird Saltalamacchia and my favorite, Donut Holstein. And yet, despite his dishonesty, you can't help but be downright impressed by him. He is resourceful in a way that the other detectives at the Santa Barbara Police Department are not. And even though you do not condone his character, you end up saying, if the rest of the police department was as clever and resourceful as he was, imagine how effective they would be. Tonight, we look at the parable of the dishonest manager. And like Sean Spencer in Psych, you can't help but be impressed by this guy. He is resourceful in a way that most other people are not. And Jesus even comments on him and says, if my disciples, who he calls sons of light, were not dishonest, but as clever and resourceful as he is with money, imagine how effective they would be with even more important matters. This is surely a hard passage to preach and a hard passage to understand. I read a lot of different commentaries, listened to a couple sermons, couple podcasts, and it seems like everyone has a little bit of a slightly different view of this. But I actually think if we read slowly enough and carefully enough, we can get at least the main gist of this passage. This passage is an important one for us as young adults because right now we are in the category of, quote, faithful over a little. My guess is as you look at your life, you're going to hope your life expands outwardly. You're going to hope that you won't stay at an entry-level job for a long while. You hope that you won't live in a dorm room or an apartment for a long time. You hope that you will turn into a family one day. And the decisions that you make right now, the priorities that you have right now, are going to scale in your life. You cannot just expect yourself to do a radical 180 with the more stuff you get. Last week we looked at the parable of the talents, and Jesus said this, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master." And Jesus says this at the end of this parable. One who is faithful in a little is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. So it's not just the good stuff in our lives that scales over time. It's the bad stuff too. So here's what I want to do. I want to divide this parable into two simple parts, the parable and the principles, the parable in verses 1 through 8, the principles in verses 9 through 13. And then we're going to do a little special something tonight to apply this passage. So my mouth is dry right now and I need another swig of water. Then we're going to get right into it. All right, here we go. The parable, starting in verse 1. He, being Jesus, also said, notice this, to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man, the manager, was wasting the master's possessions." So immediately you're introduced to two characters. The first is this rich man. The second is one of this rich man's managers. And this manager has been accused of, quote, wasting his possessions. Now, what other parable have we looked at so far in this series where we have dealt with someone wasting someone else's possessions? Someone shout it out. Talents and prodigal son. It's a two-part answer. Now, let's lean in on the prodigal son. What chapter of the Bible does the prodigal son take place in? Luke 15. Okay. And we are in Luke 16. Okay. So, what we are seeing here, what we're reading, is right after Jesus tells the parable of the lost son. It's the same teaching portion. And if you flip over to chapter 15, verse 1, we read this. "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to hear him," verse 2, "and the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled." So you got tax collectors, sinners, Pharisees, scribes, they're all there. But then verse 1 of chapter 16 introduces the disciples who are also there. So it seems like Jesus is primarily teaching to his disciples, but he's also got a lot of other people of a lot of different stripes and backgrounds listening to what Jesus is saying. So with that said, let's look at verses 2 and 3. Verse 2, "And he called him," the master or the rich man called his manager, "and said to him, 'What is this that I hear about you? Turn in the account of your management, for you can no longer be manager.' And the manager said to himself, 'What shall I do, since my master is taking the management away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I am too ashamed to beg.'" Uh-oh. So the master said, "Hey, you're fired, but as you clean out your desk, I got to see those accounts that you're overseeing." And you can picture you can picture the manager saying something like, "Yeah, let me get those to you tomorrow." He's like, "I'll get those to you tomorrow." And then he walks away and he's like, "What am I about to do?" Okay, and then he says this. He says, "What am I going to do with my life? I am not strong enough to dig." Okay, maybe he's too old or maybe he's not in great shape. He hasn't been joining Kyle at Ripped Performance at 5 a.m. or he hasn't been running with Rachel Snyder 20 miles or, listening to his Andrew Huberman podcast. Maybe he's got a little out of shape. So he's not strong enough to dig, so he can't go do manual labor, but he also is too ashamed to beg. But he has a plan. And that plan begins, he actually says the motivation for that plan in verse 4. Now, I'm going to go quickly over 4, but I want you to notice, I want you to read carefully, especially 4. We're going to come back to it later. But this is the manager's motivation. Verse 4, I have decided what to do so that when I am removed from management, people may what? Receive me into their houses. That's the key for understanding why this manager is doing what he's doing. Verse 5, so summoning his master's debtors one by one, he said to the first, how much do you owe my master? And he said, 100 measures of oil. He said to him, take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, and how much do you owe? He said, 100 measures of wheat. He said to him, take your bill and write 80. Seemingly he does this with all of his accounts, but two are mentioned particularly. And there are two words I want you to notice here. The first is the word owe. The word owe. These are accounts that have already been paid. The master has already purchased the 100 measures of oil and the 100 measures of wheat. They owe the master these measures. The money has already gone through. That's why they're called debtors, because they're in debt to the master. This is really important. And so what seemingly is going on here is that the master is reducing the measures of what has already been paid. That second word, measure, is the word I want you to see. Last week we talked about how talent was a unit of measurement, and it was particularly a very large unit of measurement. And the word measure in the Greek is also a large metric of measurement. Scholars estimate that 100 measures of oil was roughly between 800 and 900 gallons of oil. Scholars also estimate that 100 measures of wheat was something like the yield of roughly 100 acres of farming. These are big accounts, sizable debts. You can picture when these debts are paid, you have warehouses full of oil and warehouses full of wheat. This is like RFK Jr.'s worst nightmare right here. You got inflammatory seed oils and enriched wheat flour as far as the eye can see. You know, this is what wakes him up at night. You know, he wakes up in a cold sweat. His wife's like, do you have that seed oil dream again? He's like, yeah. She's like, go back to sleep. You know, the next debtor comes in his dream and he's, got 100 measures of fluoride to pour in the water, and he wakes up again in a cold sweat. Some of you don't have any idea what I'm talking about there, and that's okay. So these are sizable measures that the manager shrewdly cuts. He cuts 100 measures of oil to 50. He cuts 100 measures of wheat to 80. Now, some people argue that the manager is specifically reducing the unjust surcharges that he would have benefit from. In other words, the manager originally charged 50 measures of oil. The rich man originally charged 50 measures of oil and 80 measures of wheat. And the shrewd manager basically said, it's actually 100 and it's actually 20 additionally on the wheat. In other words, maybe a practical example of this is if you've ever bought concert tickets. The concert tickets are like $50. And then surcharge, fee, $120. And you're like, how did that happen? Like, Ticketmaster is ripping me off right now. And so a lot of people say what the I'm getting these two confused here. What the manager is doing is he's going back to his accounts and he's basically saying, he's basically making them right. He's like, you need to pay what you originally were supposed to pay, and he's, shrouding this in he's being so generous. Now, that's a possibility. After all, I think one strength of this view is that the tax collectors are listening to this. Tax collectors are in that day known for doing just that. That's why everyone hates Matthew. You can only imagine that Matthew maybe is the outcast of the disciples. Like, hey, you owe me like $20, buddy. Maybe, I'm not super convinced, but whatever the case is, however this manager gets to these measurements, 100 to 80 and 100 to 50, he's not doing it because he's concerned about justice or fairness. He's doing it because he's concerned about favors. Look again at verse 4. He says, I've decided what to do so that when I am removed from management, and then here's the kicker, people may receive me into their houses. He knows that he's about to get fired. He's about to turn in his accounts, and he's not going to be able to pay his rent. And he might have to couch surf for a while. And he wants people to be available to him to say, hey, remember how I cut you that deal? Well, it turns out, any chance you have a couch that I could sleep on for a couple nights? And also, are you guys hiring at all? So let me give you a practical example here in case it's not that clear what's going on. Okay, where's Tyler Klein? Tyler and I got coffee early this week. Sam's already laughing at him because I called on Sam several weeks ago. That's what happens. If we get coffee, then I get every right to use you in my sermon. That's my new rule, and it starts right now. So Tyler is a project manager, right? He's a project manager. He's technically training to become one, but he functions as one right now, so we're going to smooth it over and just call him a project manager. He's a project manager at a construction company, and so one of the things that Tyler does is he oversees subcontractors. And so Tyler's a great employee. He comes from good stock. I bet he's a good worker, but let's just say for the sake of illustration that he's not. Let's say Tyler's not a great worker and he's even cooking the books a little bit. And his boss hears about this and says, hey, first thing tomorrow, we need to settle up on your accounts, Tyler, with your subcontractors. And Tyler goes, okay, what am I going to do here? And that night, before Tyler comes back to work the next morning, he goes to his drywall subcontractor and says, hey, you know how we already paid you for 100 sheets of drywall? Well, actually, we're only going to take 80 from you, but guess what? You're going to get to keep that extra money. My gift to you. And then Tyler goes to the tile subcontractor and says, you know how we actually already paid for 1,000 square feet of tile? Well, actually, we only need 500 square feet. But since we already paid you, you can keep the money. My gift to you. Tyler knows that he's about to get fired, and so he's making friends with his subcontractors with the hope that his family's in the area, so he's probably not going to be couch surfing, but he's making friends with those subcontractors with the hope that they might be able to offer him something once he's out of a job. Maybe the tile subcontractor likes his previous work and hires him. Maybe the drywall subcontractor thinks he's a very generous, honest man and hires him. That's what's going on here. Tyler's covering his bases so that when he's out of a job, people might feel like they owe him a favor. It's not very ethical, Tyler, but it is very clever. It's so clever of what this manager does that the rich man actually commends him in verse 8. Look at verse 8. The master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. Wow. So in the previous parable, you have a reckoning between an irresponsible son and a cheated on father, and yet the father surprises everyone listening by welcoming the son home. In this parable, right after, you also have a reckoning between a dishonest manager and a cheated master, and the master surprises everybody by saying, I gotta hand it to him. That's pretty good. That's pretty shrewd stuff. You're still fired, but that is downright impressive. It's important to note here that the master is not commending the manager for his ethics. You have to get this clear in order to understand the parable. The master is not commending the manager for his ethics. He's commending him for his shrewdness. You probably have many TV characters that you like, not because you respect their ethics, but because you respect their shrewdness. Sean Spencer from Psych, who I mentioned before, Sherlock Holmes, Loki, Willy Wonka. I watched Catch Me If You Can like a year ago. Leonardo DiCaprio's character Frank in that movie. You commend them for their shrewdness, not their ethics. And that's what Jesus is doing. Now, with that in mind, Jesus is going to say this, make this observation in the back half of verse 8. He's going to say, for the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. Very interesting there. Put simply, what Jesus is saying is that non-believers, what he calls sons of the world, are often more shrewd in their dealings on this earth then are Christians, what he calls the sons of light. This may look a few different ways. Businesses are often more clever than churches are in their financial management. Coca-Cola is often better at distributing soda than Christians are at distributing the gospel. Apple is often better at creating lifelong followers than churches are at creating lifelong disciples. The sons of this world are often more shrewd with their own generation than the sons of light. David Guzik helpfully puts it like this: the average secular businessmen of his day, Jesus' day, were more wise, bold, and forward-thinking in the management of what they had than the people of God were with managing what they had. If our lives are not well managed, if our money is wasted on silly things, if our families are up in arms, if our apartments are dirty and unwelcoming, if our apologetics and reasons for our faith are unintelligent, if our churches are filled with strife, then what are we supposed exactly to offer the world? If your non-believing friend spends her money more wisely than you do, treats her family more warmly than you do, takes care of her house more diligently than you do, reasons through big life issues more critically and thoughtfully than you do, and has a community that is more unified than yours is, then what exactly are you going to have to offer that person? Jesus, exactly. And that leads to my next point. You can take this principle too far. The principle still exists, but you can take it too far. You don't have to be considered excellent in the eyes of the world to do any real ministry. Let's remind ourselves in 1 Corinthians that Paul talks about how God uses the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. Let's remind ourselves in Philippians and 2 Corinthians that Paul talks about how God ministers to others and reveals his grace through Paul's pain and weakness and suffering. And let's remind ourselves that the pinnacle moment of Jesus' ministry is being mocked and scorned on a cross. So you can take this principle too far. As was mentioned, I don't even know who said that. As was mentioned, you always have Jesus to offer. But if you don't manage your own life and resources well, that's going to hinder what the world thinks you might have to offer them. Now, in light of that, Jesus gives what I summarize as 4 principles. The principles of mutuality, multiplication, meaning, and mastery. I'm going to go through these quickly. So first, the principle of mutuality. Notice this in verse 9. So Jesus is now reflecting on the parable and he's giving principles based off that parable. Verse 9, and I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into eternal dwellings. This is maybe the most complicated verse of this parable, and the most ink has been spilled on exactly what Jesus means here. First, by unrighteous wealth, I don't think that Jesus is meaning wealth accrued through sinful means. Unrighteous wealth, like money that you make by selling drugs or gambling or something like that. I don't think that's what Jesus means. I think unrighteous wealth, in the words of Craig Blomberg, is a stock idiom for all of money. Unrighteous wealth doesn't mean sinful wealth. It just means not heavenly true riches. We're just talking about money here. And so I think that Jesus is saying, use your money to make friends, so that when your money fails you, they may receive you into eternal dwellings. In other words, when you're sick or in need or broke, people are there to support you. And furthermore, when you die, you probably want to have people witnessing well to you at your funeral. They are in some sense receiving you into eternal dwellings. And you have built good relationships with them. So I know I said we do applications at the end, but let me just give you one real quick right here. Go out and make friends. I think that's the application here. Go out and make friends. Get out of your room on a Friday night. Your video game friends, I'm not saying they're not unimportant, but they are not as important as your real life friends. Your friend in Ashburn can provide a couch for you to sleep on and a shoulder for you to cry on if you need it. But your friend from Fortnite who lives in Idaho can't do that. So go out to eat. Go to a movie. Go axe throwing. And consider paying for the person next to you. Be generous with your money. Don't do it underhandedly or think that everyone will now owe you favor. You're the favor ower. You're just paying for everyone like, oh man, people are going to owe me so much. But what you do want to have is a reputation of generosity rather than stinginess, because that reputation will ultimately be better socially for you and open up more avenues for you to share the true riches of the gospel with other people. Proverbs 11:25 puts it like this: the generous will prosper, those who refresh others will themselves be refreshed. First principle of mutuality. Second principle, the principle of multiplication. Look at verse 10. One who is faithful in a little is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. We looked at this earlier. And earlier in the parable, Jesus used the phrase eternal dwellings. Actually, last verse, he used the phrase eternal dwellings. Here he uses the phrase true riches. And I think what Jesus is doing is shifting this parable from merely being about earthly stewardship of resources, and he's accelerating it into stewardship over heavenly resources as well. True riches. Because this is not just a parable about using resources wisely in a temporary manner, but about investing wisely into things that have eternal meaning and impact. And our use of money and our stewardship of other people's money is paradigmatic of how we use true riches, how we use the kingdom resources that God has given. These things go hand in hand. I'll give you one brief example. I recently got to hear about Jason Van Dorsten, one of our pastors, JVD. I call him Chat JVD. That's his nickname. I got to hear about his recent trip to Brazil. And we support missionaries. If you're unfamiliar, we support missionaries named Marcelo and Holly Vieira. I think I might be pronouncing that last name wrong. But they are in Brazil, and specifically what they have done is they have done a lot of community outreach and built a church in this area of Brazil that is located right around this massive landfill, this massive trash dump. And so much of their local community, much of the economy is based off of this trash dump. It's a very impoverished area. A lot of people, their whole lives from childhood to death, will be scouring through this trash landfill, looking for resources to survive one day at a time. They've planted a church in this community, and this community, because it's impoverished, like many impoverished areas, also has gangs and drugs and human trafficking, prostitution, and so on and so forth. It's a very rough area. And thankfully, Marcelo and Holly have seen in their church many people come to know the Lord. Praise the Lord for that. And what Jason was saying is, in this small community, this was so cool. He shared this at staff meeting on Tuesday, and I immediately was like, that's going in my sermon. He shared that you can almost tell the houses or huts or shacks of the believers in the community versus the non-believers. Because what do the believers do? They sweep their floors, they clean their homes, their kids are smiling, and even some of them paint. They paint with bright colors. They're joyous. Because they've received the eternal riches of the gospel of Jesus Christ, that has so impacted them in their own temporary stewardship of their things in the present. They don't have much, but what they do have, they're taken care of. Stewardship of the gospel, stewardship of heavenly resources, stewardship of our money for the purposes of expanding the number in the kingdom when it comes, is directly tied to how you steward the things that you have right in front of you. We should be doing the same thing. Finally, the principle of mastery. The principle of mastery. So we've looked at mutuality, we've looked at multiplication, we've looked at meaning, and now we look at mastery. Look at verse 13. This is where the parable ends. No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. You might be thinking, that sounds a lot like Matthew 6. That's because it does sound a lot like Matthew 6. Now, notice how Jesus says that you cannot serve two masters. He uses the word cannot. You cannot serve God and money. He's not saying, well, you technically can, but you shouldn't. He's not saying you shouldn't serve two masters. He's saying you can't serve two masters. Have you ever had two bosses at work that seem to have diametrically opposed expectations for your work? You can technically serve two bosses if they're aligned. But when you have two bosses that are diametrically opposed to you, when one is like, I want the project this way, and then your boss's boss is like, I want the project that way, you're like, golly, what do I do here? You realize I can't please both people. Do I please my immediate boss, but make the higher up boss angry? I don't have to deal as much with the higher up boss. I do have to see my immediate boss on a day-to-day level. Or do I please the higher up boss because the higher up boss will give me a raise, but then I have to displease my immediate boss and I have to see my immediate boss on a daily basis? Many of you have been put in a situation where literally pleasing two different people, that option doesn't exist for you. And what Jesus is saying is that God and money are two diametrically opposed masters. God says give, money says get. God says be generous, money says be stingy. God says put others above yourself, money says put yourself as number one. Who else is going to look out for you if you don't? God says work hard and be content with what you currently have. Money says work hard in order to be content with what you may or may not have in the future. God and money demand different things from you. And money makes a great gift from the Lord, but it makes a terrible God. Now, at this point, I would normally like to make some tangible applications for y'all. But as I said earlier, we're going to do something a little bit different tonight. Rather than me make the applications from this parable for you, I want you all at your tables to make the applications yourselves. And then through a system which I will not describe until we do it step by step because it'll be confusing if I dump it all on you at once, we will go ahead and share those applications with the tables around you. So here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to make two practical applications with the following principles in mind. And I listed the ones that I just talked about there: mutuality, multiplication, meaning, and mastery. I want you at your table to come up with two, and this is the key word, practical applications. Your application should not be give more. That application is going to stay in here when you walk out this door. That's not a good application. It's not measurable, right? It's not a SMART goal. Where's my man Larry? SMART goals, right? You're big into the SMART goals. What does SMART stand for again? I'm putting you on the spot here. Simple. Simple, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. So I want you to make two smart applications at your table. I got there, barely. And what I want you to do is I want you at your table to have one person be the scribe. So I'm going to give you like 5 to 7 minutes, make two applications. It looks like Aiden's a scribe at his table. So have one scribe. That scribe is going to have a special role for us in a little bit. So one scribe, two applications, go for it. We'll see you in a little bit. Well, I hope you guys had a great discussion. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing for you guys. I hope you guys were able to share, and in total, your table should have gotten 6 application points. The 2 that you originally came up with, the 2 that the visiting scribe told you, and the 2 that your original scribe brought back to you. So here's my final challenge to you. What's going to be the one takeaway, the one smart application that you do in light of tonight, in light of this parable? Maybe it's you've been a Christian for a long time, but you've never had a regular giving habit of generosity. So maybe what you need to do is set a goal that by the end of this weekend, you're going to schedule a reoccurring gift to your local church, whether it's here or another local church in the area, and you're going to pick one of your favorite nonprofits that does good work that you love, and you're going to give to them as well. Maybe your application is that there is someone who you think you could be really good friends with, and you want to take them out to coffee on Sunday afternoon after church. Maybe the application for you is that by the end of this weekend, you're going to do that monthly spending analysis. And guess what? It's the last day of the month, so it's the perfect time to do that for the month of July. Whatever it might be, let me encourage you to do it with prayer, to do it before the Lord. I would also encourage you to read 2 Corinthians 8 and 9 on generous giving and joyful giving. Meditate on that and take a step forward in your discipleship journey, that everything would be under Christ's lordship, including your money, your financial ambitions, and the ways that you use the true riches that God has given you. We can give everything that we have, including our money, to Christ because Christ has given everything to us. He has sacrificed himself on the cross on our behalf. He has paid the debt that we owed, and our praise should be all to him, and our bank accounts and financial statements should reflect that. Let me go ahead and pray for us. Jesus, you are the King of Kings. That's what we confess tonight. And we thank you that you desire for our hearts to be postured in a proper way towards you as we follow in the path of discipleship, as we become more like you, as we witness to your gospel, and as we seek to search out and save the lost as you did. I pray that we would maximize our money, our resources, our talents, our abilities, everything that you've given, that it would come under your lordship, that we'd be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. And it's in your name we pray, Jesus. And all God's people said, amen.
Thank you so much for watching this video from our Young Adults Ministry here at Reston Bible Church. We're really happy to be able to provide this message to you as a resource in your own discipleship journey. But we don't want this message or our ministry to get in the way of your own local church involvement. So let me encourage you from wherever you're watching to get plugged into a local church near you. And if you're in the Northern Virginia area and you're not plugged into a local church, come see us at RBC on a Sunday morning at either one of our 9 or 10:45 services. We'd love to meet you. We'd love to get you plugged in here at a local church. We hope that you enjoyed this message.